In your opinion, what are the key factors that drive women to reconsider staying in engineering? And what solutions or workplace strategies have helped address these beyond what we've been speaking about?
Yeah. So, I think unfortunately, and fortunately or unfortunately, so the employer that I'm working for now is fantastic. And I think they do a really good job of, work-life balance, like true work-life balance, and really consciously not falling into like gender stereotypes. But I can't say that was my experience all the time. A lot of
Despite making up nearly half the students in engineering programs, women are significantly underrepresented in the engineering workforce. Studies have shown that up to 50% of women who enter engineering careers leave the field within 10 to 15 years. But why is this the case? Is it due to gender bias, lack of role models, or something else entirely? In today's episode, I'm joined by Elaine Dasti, Vice President and Company Practice Leader at T&M Associates, to talk about factors driving these high attrition rates, including stereotypes, pressures, and insufficient support systems. We'll discuss actionable solutions to create more inclusive, supportive, and equitable engineering industry for everyone. I'm your host, Rebecca Swaby, and this is the Women in Engineering podcast. And with that, let's jump right into today's episode. Now it's time to jump right into the main segment of today's episode. Today, I have with me Elaine Dasti. Elaine, welcome to the Women in Engineering podcast.
Good morning. Thank you.
So let's start. Can you just tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what led you to become Vice President and Company Practice Leader at T&M Associates?
Sure. So I am a mechanical engineer by trade. I went to Rutgers School of Engineering. Worked in New York City for my first job. Kind of made my way through, worked on some really nice, prestigious projects there. I'm actually born and raised in New Jersey. So at some point I wanted to move back and actually be closer to my family. And so it led me to find a job, in New Jersey doing the same thing. So found a small company where I led the mechanical group there. And about, I guess it was probably about 10 years ago at this point, the company that I work for now, T&M Associates, was looking to bring MEP, mechanical, electrical, plumbing work back in-house. They hadn't done it in some time. I kind of got it now into the business years ago. And so I was speaking with the gentleman who actually is now our COO. At the time, he was just running one of our local New Jersey offices about the prospects of coming on board and starting an MEP practice for them. And so in 2016, we kind of, pulled the trigger and did that. And so I've been ever since kind of growing a group. We're up to 17 people and become a major service line for our company. And so that's kind of how I got here.
That's amazing. It sounds like a combination of right place, right time, but also a lot of experience leading up to that.
Yes.
Yeah. Great. And how did you decide to get into engineering in the first place, going back to university days?
So, very similar to what most engineers will say is I really loved math and science. In particular, I actually really loved math. But I didn't necessarily want to get into a career just, geared towards math and, applied to some schools for engineering and obviously got into Rutgers. And then as I, exited school, it was kind of difficult trying to figure out exactly what aspect of mechanical engineering I wanted to do. There's obviously a number of different things you could do with that. So, went to career fairs and things like that and landed an opportunity in New York City, which was, again, working for, on some pretty prestigious projects. So very exciting. But yeah, that's...
Could you imagine that you would be doing the job that you're doing today when you were early on in your career?
No, not necessarily. It's... Again, there were so many different opportunities and ways you could go with this. So no, not necessarily. I think one of the things that was helpful is, in college, they have classes that kind of introduce you to different aspects of the engineering industry. Internships weren't as prevalent actually when I was in school. So I don't think it was as well known that you should do internships. And now I encourage so many people to do internships because I think it's such a critical part of figuring out what industry you do want to be in. But I think I was very fortunate in that the first opportunity that I took ended up being something that I really, really enjoyed. I like the aspect, I like the design aspect. I also like the people aspect of my industry, the fact that I get to go and interact with architects and contractors and other engineers. So I think that's another part of my job that I really enjoy is the collaboration piece. So I was very fortunate that I found something that ended up being very suited towards my personality.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I would love to hear how that dynamic changed over the years. There's a lot of engineers entering their careers that maybe want to get face time with the client, but maybe, they haven't necessarily worked for a long time. How did your experience in terms of working with people, clients, change over the years?
So actually so my first employer really their view was that, the people aspect of it and the client aspect of it was very important. And so I actually sat in front of a client the very first day
Oh,
on my
that's
job.
amazing.
And it was, you really want to talk about trial by fire. I mean, it really was. And certainly you wouldn't necessarily do that with everyone, right? There's different people that are a little bit more social and not in the engineering industry, right? So you want to gauge that as well. But
Yeah.
but for me, that was an interest that I had expressed to my employer, and they said, here you go. So we sat in some very big meetings, really from, I mean, literally day one. So my role in those meetings have changed over the years, right? At first you take a back seat and you kind of listen and learn, and you're trying to, I'm a mechanical engineer. I design mechanical systems is really where you start. But you're in meetings where you're talking about the entire building. You're talking about all of the different trades. And they were things that weren't familiar to me. I mean, nothing was familiar to me at first, but
Yeah.
there are things that were not immediately familiar to me. So you're listening about the electrical systems, the plumbing systems, the fire protection. And then you start to get into the architecture and how that all fits together, the site civil, the structural. So you keep your ears open, you listen to all of this, because ultimately the person I'm attending a meeting with needs to talk about, in some instances, all of these trades with some level of certainty. You don't have to be an expert in all of them, but you certainly need to be able to represent your company in a meeting to collaborate and coordinate these systems. So you start by kind of taking a back seat in these systems, in these meetings, keeping your ears open and just taking it as much as you can. And from there, you kind of learn how they're approaching these conversations with the client, and with the contractors.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It's almost like you're steeped in it, and that helps direct you in terms of what you're going to go deeper and learn.
Yes.
Great. It sounds like there were some pretty formative projects in the early phases of your careers. Are there any that you would be able to share with us and just talk about what the work was?
Oh, sure. I mean, the one of the biggest projects that I worked on right out of the gate was the Bank of America building in Bryant Park. So
Wow.
at the time, that was the second tallest in New York City, and so obviously I was came in the middle of it. It wasn't my project alone, but came in the middle of it and was able to design certain aspects of it and help oversee the construction administration piece. So it was meeting people from Bank of America. We also did the retail there, their executive floors there. So some nice stuff to get your feet wet.
Yeah, again, it sounds a little bit like trial by fire, as you said before, especially getting onto construction site, if that's what you were doing at some
Yes.
point.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. On the
Amazing.
hoist up 52 floors. That was fun.
Yeah, yeah. And you sort of already touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious, how much of the work that you're doing now would you say that you learned in school versus on the job?
So, I mean, really, they didn't have, Rutgers in particular didn't have like an architectural engineering program. A lot of schools do now, and they also didn't offer an HVAC class, and I'm not sure if they do at this point. But so I really didn't learn any of this in school. It was all on the job training. Yeah. So you learn certainly the principles that you use, and you learn a way of thinking and a way of approaching problem solving. But from an academic standpoint, I mean, this wasn't taught in my curriculum.
Okay, great. And then, getting into some of the questions around men and women in engineering, what do you think are some of the similarities in terms of why both men and women will choose the engineering field?
So I think where I see the differences is sometimes what men and women are looking to accomplish in engineering. So women seem to be sort of more interested in, not that men aren't, but in the socially conscious, right? And a lot of time women specialize in environmental versus electrical. They're looking for positions to improve situations, make a difference in people's lives, things like that. So, but women also, it's interesting. So women actually also tend to start with the self-doubt and seeking reassurance as early as college. So, and that's not just from my experience. If you actually look at some research on this topic, which I have, because I think this is just interesting to me in general, right? I've been in this field for 17 years. There's been some improvement over that time of women that have been retained in the engineering industry, but across the board, I mean, it's still the least represented of the STEM field. So this is interesting to me. So I've looked at the research, and the self-doubt aspect starts as early as college, and men talk about doubting themselves, but they don't necessarily seek reassurance from others. So I think that's just an interesting aspect.
Yeah, that is interesting. And the fact that it starts as early as college kind of says a lot. That's a lot of time to experience self-doubt in your engineering career.
Right.
Was it something that, like, are you recognizing that in some of the people that you're supporting? Is it something you've thought about as a leader in your company?
Yeah, I mean, so I've worked for a number of different people, right, and with all of varying personalities. And one person that I worked for, was, very smart and a good boss in a lot of ways, but uh, it did not matter how hard I worked and what I did. I almost never got recognition for what I was doing. If I did something wrong, I would be the first to hear about it. But if I,
It's usually how it goes.
right. But I kind of I took that into account. And as I started to lead my own teams, I realized how important that was, the recognition, regardless of gender. I think that's just an important thing for people to understand, that they're doing a good job. It helps reassure them. And don't be wrong, we all make mistakes. I mean, we're humans, right? We're engineers, but we're humans, and no one's trying to make a mistake. And when they do, I view it more as a team that needs support, and that we figure out how to navigate that problem together. So certainly with both females and males, I mean, regardless, I think it's important to have that team mentality of, this is our problem, not your problem, and making sure that they're getting the reassurance and the recognition that they deserve as they go through. So I know personally how it made me feel, and I kind of I've taken that into account as I've kind of moved up the ladder in my career.
Yeah, absolutely. I can definitely relate to that too. And if you have any more practical strategies or specific examples around how you provide that reassurance to your team, would be great for our listeners to hear about that.
Uh, yeah, I mean, it can be something as simple as somebody sending a really good email, like a really well thought out email that just hits on all of the right points to the client of, and it just, taking them aside and saying, that was a good email. Or spending some extra time, right? Maybe staying late, finishing a project to get it out, out the door for a deadline. It's things like that. I mean, people are, you don't have to work overtime. I mean, certainly, we may encourage it in certain instances. We want to get the projects out the door, but they don't have to do it. They're taking out of their personal time, out of their, personal lives to be able to get these projects done because they care about their job. So the least I can do is say, thank you for spending the extra time and doing a good job with that,
Right.
is kind of the way I view it.
Exactly. It sounds like a lot of it is just honestly paying close attention to what the
Right.
team is doing, and finding moments to recognize it when they do, especially go above and beyond. So that's great.
Sure.
In your opinion, what are the key factors that drive women to reconsider staying in engineering, and what solutions or workplace strategies have helped address these beyond what we've been speaking about?
Yeah. So I mean, I think unfortunately, and fortunately or unfortunately, so the employer that I'm working for now is fantastic. And I think they do a really good job of, work-life balance, like true work-life balance, and really consciously not falling into like gender stereotypes. But I can't say that that was my experience all the time. A lot of, and you speak to other women in engineering, that it's a similar sentiment, is there are workplaces where you're exposed to sort of like the old boys club mentality, if you will. And I mean, sometimes it's blatant sexual harassment. Sometimes it's just, you're asked to sort paper or copy or collect equipment or something like that, right? Maybe being isolated from certain networking events, maybe assuming that you don't want to be in a golf tournament or something, something about, right? Just like the little things
The little
that
things,
sort of
yeah.
add up. So I think there's that aspect of it. It's also, in my industry in particular, our deliverables are very deadline based, right? We projects that need to go out the door to be able to be, to be bid and constructed by certain timelines. And so, being conscious of staff's availability to work overtime is something that is a key factor. And no matter whether we like it or not, I think a lot of the household tasks still tend to fall on women. And so if you're looking to, if you've got a family and you have other things going on outside the workplace, it makes it very difficult to then also be very successful in your career. So if you don't have an employer that recognizes that, I think it makes it very challenging. And historically, with these deadlines, a lot of companies expect you to work a lot of hours. I worked a lot of hours when I was, earlier on in my career, and I try to avoid that. We try to avoid that as a company because, I think one thing that actually COVID sort of brought to light for one reason or other is the true work-life balance and the opportunity to be around for your family and do things for, if you have kids, but parents, what have you. And so recognizing how important that is sort of helps balance things out, but that didn't always exist, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it sounds like COVID was a bit of an impetus at the company to change the way that work is done for the better
Right.
for everybody, not just for
Sure.
women in engineering.
Yeah. I agree. Absolutely 100% agree with that.
Yeah. Were there any specific strategies beyond work from home that you guys took that helped create more of that work-life balance, or on your team, things that you guys do specifically?
Yeah, I mean, so I think part of it is aligning clients' expectations. So not setting arbitrary deadlines for when things are due, right? We have a certain amount of staff and we want, it's based on a 40-hour work week, and they will work more if we ask them to, right? But it's not something that I want to ask consistently. I feel like the ebbs and flows of the amount of hours that we're putting in is very important to maintain that balance. So it's aligning clients' expectations for when projects are going to get finished. Just because they said that they want it Friday doesn't mean that we should say, okay, we're going to give it to you Friday. Like
Right.
if there's a reason that you need it Friday because there is a grant that you need to qualify for and you need to have the documentation and it's due on it, right? Like those are all things that we take into account of aligning deadlines. So it's making an effort not to overwork people, and then also making sure that our staff is right sized for our workload. So if we're consistently asking people to put in extra time, we need more staff. So
Right.
it's something that obviously you have to keep an eye on it. You don't want to hire staff that ends up then, everybody's slow, but we want to make sure that we're right sized for the workload and our growing workload. So I think all of that has sort of helped allow people to be able to spend their time in the office and then, do what they need to do after hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our company actually also provides, in addition to the work from home, we have what's called core hours. So we recognize that some people like to get up first thing in the morning and start work at 7 a.m. and be done by 3. And there's other people that kind of, have a lot going on in the morning and they might want to just roll in at 10 and start there, right? And work until, until the evening. So we have core hours, which are supposed to be 10 to 3. We try and schedule all of our meetings 10 to 3, recognizing that if you need to go to a doctor's appointment or run a kid somewhere or something like, whatever it is, we ask you to be available during those hours for our team meetings to the best of your ability. And then whatever your circumstances are, whatever your preferences are for working, we try and be as consistent as possible so we know when people are available, but we provide that flexibility so that people can do what they need to do. And if they want to, jump back on later and do work at night, that's fine too. Everybody's kind of got their thing where they are the most productive.
That's amazing. And it sounds like there has to be a lot of trust too to support that system.
Yes, absolutely. I don't really believe in micromanagement. I've been there too. And I think that if you have the right staff and you're hiring people that you trust, they should, you're expecting that they're going to hold themselves accountable, that they're going to hold the team accountable, right? Accountability is a huge piece of that, of allowing people that flexibility to do it is to do what they need to do in those off hours.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. And there might be some people listening that are not in as great of a situation where perhaps they don't have great work-life balance and their employer isn't as supportive. And perhaps, there's always deadlines and they're working a crazy amount of hours. They might be an individual contributor that can't control those kinds of things. How would you suggest they approach the conversation with their manager if they're not feeling good about their work-life balance?
Yeah, the first is, you want to make sure that you're maximizing the time that you are working, right? So before you have that conversation, I think introspectively, you need to make sure that the time that you're spending in the office really is spent being as efficient as possible, right? Because you certainly don't want to approach that conversation and then them say, well, but you're
You're
not
not getting much done.
Yeah. So I mean, that's just a
You have to be
general,
self-aware of
right,
your
right.
contributions.
General piece of advice. I mean, there's, I think that if you're at an employer that values you, that, all the things said, I think if your employer values you, that they should be open to that conversation. And I think that we live in an age where, especially in the engineering industry, there are less people available than there are more opportunities than there are, right? So,
Yes,
if I
yes,
said that correctly,
absolutely.
right? So,
Shortage of the kinds of people that we're trying to hire and keep around.
exactly. So there are companies that are trying to retain top talent that provide flexibility and provide a good working environment. So I think that's something that if your employer is not open to that conversation, you need to think about that, because I think there are enough opportunities out there where you could find that. And I think it's on the employers, right? On the flip side, it's on the employers to provide, I think, you know, training of supervisors so that the sexual harassment isn't happening, right? Because that, right? I mean, we're sort of beyond that. We should be beyond that at this point. The flexible work schedules and yeah,
It
I
sounds
think
like this is a way that firms can ensure that they're competitive, especially in today's employment market.
yes,
This is the
yes.
number one factor.
I think it's become an extremely big factor.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, let's jump. Can you share any personal examples of obstacles you faced in your career and how you overcame them?
Yes. So I think so very early on in my career. So going back to sort of the lack of women in the engineering field. So I recall going to some early meetings with I had a really great mentor, male mentor, but really really great in my first job. So learned a lot from him. But I remember going to job sites with him and him talking to contractors and you're looking at change orders and trying to navigate them and reduce them for the client, right? Do right by your client, right? Like, I mean, there might be a mistake on the drawings. You're trying to, right,
Yeah.
minimize that. And so, but later on, maybe they missed something and so it's I don't know, like sort of you scratch my back, I'll scratch
Give and
yours
take
kind
a
of
little
thing,
bit.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But I realized that the way in which he was interacting with these other male contractors is not a way in which I could talk to a contractor. Like, it just wouldn't have been appropriate. And so I'm watching this, right? Again, you're kind of observing, like, okay, like I need to learn, I need to figure. But in my mind, I'm thinking, well, how am I going to navigate this when it's my turn as a woman? How do you have the same positive outcome, but you navigate it from a female perspective, right? When you're so, and it was trial and error for me. And thankfully, I think that there are, some more women that have excelled, that have kind of made their way up the ladder in engineering. And so there's some more mentorship there than there was previously. But at the time, I mean, there was nobody that was an executive at that company that was female. And I've had very few throughout my career to really look up to figure out how to. So a lot of it was kind of just navigating it on my own. But I think a big component now is that, and I think it's important for women to look for this if they're sort of coming up, is look where's the female leadership in your company? Are they making an effort at the very least to promote some of the female leadership? Because I think having those people as examples who have sort of already figured out how to navigate it is very, very important and beneficial for women that are coming up in the field.
Yeah. And do you think if you were on that job site and you had somebody who was maybe more similar to you in terms of how they approached the job and the career that you could look up to, it would have made a big difference early on?
I think it certainly would have made it easier to understand what that conversation was, should look like. I do, and the number of times where I found myself in a conference room with all men, and you almost start to not notice, which is kind of crazy. But just even the way that you present yourself there, I think it would have made it a little bit easier to not have to sort of be blazing the trail.
Yeah. And trying on different styles too.
Right, right.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. What inspired you to stay in the field of engineering despite these challenges that you were facing? Was there anything that made a big difference for you?
So for me, and again, this is, not everybody would be this fortunate. For me, the employer that I worked for made all the difference. So at the point at which I was about to start having children, is sort of when I started working for my current employer. And again, they afforded the work-life balance and just sort of a better, it's a better environment, a healthier work environment to be in to do that. And, regardless of the gender, there were other people that I was working with that all had kids, right? And that everybody kind of was at that, understood how important the family aspect of it was. So not necessarily females, but had that understanding. And so for me, I think that really made the difference, because at that point in my career, if I was working in a toxic work environment, maybe I would have gone out on maternity leave and not come back. I can't say, but I was in a good situation at that point. So I think it's critical that, hopefully you're able to find yourself in that situation to stay.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It sounds like it's a lot about the community of people around you at the end of the day, and the culture and the environment that's created at work. One last question. What final piece of advice can you give to women in engineering who might be contemplating leaving the profession?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, find an employer that appreciates you. Put in the hard work, put in the time. Look for female mentors. Look for people that you can look up to who have kind of been through this. And I know not all of them, right? But a lot of women that have kind of made their way through this are happy to share what and those are the women you want to align yourself with anyway, right? Not necessarily the women that say, I had to do this, so you should have to do this too. Those are not, you want to align yourself with the women that are happy to share what has helped them and what they've been able to navigate. So find people who are willing to mentor you and show you, sort of what they've been through. And again, find an employer that appreciates you.
Awesome. And is there anything I didn't ask you that you think that I should have asked that you want to speak about?
I don't think so.
Okay, that's fine. Well, this has been such a lovely conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your experience. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast so you won't miss upcoming episodes featuring interviews with other inspiring women engineers and discussions about industry trends and so much more. Go to womaninengineeringpodcast.com, where you'll find a summary of the key points in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, and books mentioned during this episode. Until next time, may your engineering endeavors be as remarkable as the women whose stories we're sharing. Stay curious, keep innovating, and engineer a better future.